Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Scheller. Thanks for joining this next episode of In the Nick of Time. We're going to get started in about 15 minutes with Stuart Scheller today joining us to talk about his departure from the Department of Defense and what he's going to be doing next. It's going to be a very interesting discussion to see what he has learned and what he would like to maybe change and what's going to be his next engagement. So stay tuned. We're going to get started in about 13 minutes. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. This is Nick Scheller. Welcome to this next episode of In the Nick of Time. We're going to get started in about 10 minutes with Stuart Scheller. A lot of stuff to talk about today. Is going to be pretty exciting, a pretty unique episode for sure. In the meantime, if you want to share the company you're with and your name so we can highlight you on the screen, do that in the comment section. Also, if you have a question for Stuart, please start asking the question now. We have so many questions already from social media. Make sure you start the question with a Q so we know it's a question, so we can highlight the question on the screen and hopefully cover as many questions as we can. Also, if you have not subscribed already to the YouTube channel, go to youtube.com/Nicolas Scheller. You'll be able to subscribe. Thanks so much for the people that already subscribed. We just reached our target of 1,000 subscribers. Very excited. Also, we have great traction on LinkedIn with 8,500 subscribers and on the newsletter as well. So it's very exciting to see. I wanted to thank you again for following us and joining us in this journey to make sure that our kids have a fighting chance at winning against China 20 years from now. So stay tuned. We're going to get started in about 10 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. We're going to get started in about 5 minutes. Thanks so much for joining so many people here today. I think we're going to break the record of live show for DoD today with Stuart. It's going to be fun. We're going to have a lot of questions. We got probably, 700 questions for Stuart already on social media. So that's going to be pretty insane. We're going to have to maybe cut that a little bit. So if you have questions you want to ask Stuart, you should probably put them into the comment section now also, because we're going to pick people live as well, not just the people that posted a lot of questions on social media. So you get a shot at getting your question to Stuart as well. I have my own questions, of course. We're going to get started in about 5 minutes. Stay tuned. If you have not subscribed to the show, please do that on youtube.com/Nicolas Chillon. Also, if you want to put your name and company and share you here, we already have so many people, and I'm not going to be able to highlight everybody here on the screen between Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. A little bit on Facebook, but God knows I don't use it too much, so that kind of makes sense. So stay tuned. We're going to get started in about 5 minutes now. Get excited and start dancing. We're going to have the little music going on. Thanks. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to this next episode of In the Nick of Time, and thanks so much for being so many to join us between Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, and of course YouTube. We're gonna probably break the internet a little bit today, but that's exciting because we have probably the best guest to help us do that, with Stuart joining us today. Before we get started, I wanted to remind everybody to subscribe to the show at youtube.com/Nicolas Chalon. If you missed it, we released quite a few videos in the last couple of weeks with the DevSecOps, how to compete with victim security in 2022, the top 5 DevSecOps tools of 2022, and when you finally understand what Kubernetes is and why Kubernetes is a must, even if you think it's overkill. And I make a case where I think you're wrong. So if you don't agree, perfect debate on Twitter now that it's finally going back to being a free speech platform. So pretty excited about that as well. If you missed it, you probably live under a rock, so you probably need to Google Elon Musk and Twitter. So also in the news, we have announced yesterday that finally Istio, the service mesh, is going to be applied to join the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. We kind of pushed Google for the last 3 years now with my work at the DoD to make that happen. So it's pretty exciting to see finally this happen, and that's going to be a big game changer for the open source community, and of course for the CNCF and the DevSecOps teams across DoD. Last piece of news before we welcome our guest today is the excitement that I've been having for the last 3 months now that I've known that the Deputy Secretary of Defense has selected Craig Martell from Lyft. Craig is an awesome expert in AI and machine learning, and also a great patriot as well. He wants to make sure our kids have a fighting chance at winning against China in 20 years, and so it's going to be awesome to become the first and the new Chief Digital and AI Officer as a direct report to DepSecDef, and of course he's going to be controlling the JAIC, and that's going to be merging into his office, DDS, the Digital Defense Service, also merging into his office. The Chief Data Officer office also merging into his office, and Advana, the data lake, also will be merging there as well. A little short, I had asked DSD to make sure we also move the software side of the house and the cloud from DISA and DoD CIO into his office, and so that's going to be a big impediment to his success. And of course, he's inheriting a lot of existing debt and kind of tech debt and people's debt. So that's going to be interesting to see how he's going to be able to tackle this. And I hope everybody here on the show will be able to help his office succeed, as the nation that will be controlling AI will be controlling the planet. So obviously pretty important stuff. Okay. Today we have a very special guest, and before bringing him on the screen with me, I want to show you his video, and if you've missed it, you kind of missed a gem here, and I love to get his reaction, of course, on what happened after that. And if you don't know Stuart, of course, he's been deployed 5 times. He has numerous awards, including the Military Service Medal 3 times and the Navy Commendation 3 times, and with a V for Valor 2 times, and the Bronze Star, and very accomplished Marine, of course. Is the author of Crisis of Command, and is now a professional speaker and a political advocate, and hopefully he's going to be running for something. I hope we'll learn more about that today. He's launched also the website AuthenticAmericans.com. So if you have not checked that out, you should, because there's a lot of great stuff on there. And if you want to follow him, of course, he's on LinkedIn and pretty much everywhere like me. So check that out. But before I bring him on the screen, because I really think you should get to see the video, I'm going to bring that video on the screen. So I'm going to swap screen now. To do that, just give me a second. We usually don't do that, but that's going to be an exception to the rule. Okay, so let's listen for the next 4 minutes to what he had to say back a few months ago.
Good evening. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller, United States Marine Corps. I'm the current battalion commander for Advanced Infantry Training Battalion. I've been in the Marine Infantry for 17 years. Started my tour with Victor 1-8. It's the current unit that's doing perimeter security, dealing with the mess that's going on there. You can see open source reporting that there was an explosion and some people were killed. I know through my inside channels that one of those people that were killed was someone that I have a personal relationship with. I won't go into more details because the families are still being notified. Not making this video because it's potentially an emotional time. Making it because I have a growing discontent and contempt for my perceived ineptitude at the foreign policy level, and I want to specifically ask some questions to some of my senior leaders. And I'll say, as a person that's not at 20 years, I feel like I have a lot to lose. If you play chess, you can only see 2-3 moves out because there's too many variables. I thought through if I post this video, what might happen to me, especially if the video picks up traction, if I have the courage to post it. But I think what you believe in can only be defined by what you're willing to risk. So if I'm willing to risk my current battalion commander seat, my retirement, my family's stability, to say some of the things that I want to say, I think it gives me some moral high ground to demand the same honesty, integrity, accountability from my senior leaders. And so I want to start with, we'll just use the Marine Corps. We'll just stick with the Marine Corps. So in the current fallout of Afghanistan, a lot of Marines were posting on social media, and in response to that, the Commandant published a letter to the Service Chief of the Marine Corps. And I'll read from it. It was dated 18 August, so only a week ago. The Commandant, sir, you wrote, some of you may be struggling with a simple question: was it all worth it? We want you to know that your service is meaningful, powerful, and important. You fought for the Marine to your left and the Marine to your right. You never let them down. Then you go on to say that if we're struggling, we should seek counseling, which, I get it. People have killed people. I've killed people, and I seek counseling, and that's fine. There's time and place for that. But the reason people are so upset on social media right now is not because the Marine on the battlefield let someone down. That service member has always rose to the occasion, done extraordinary things. People are upset because their senior leaders let them down, and none of them are raising their hands and accepting accountability or saying, we messed this up. If an 05 battalion commander has the simplest live fire incident, he opened fire. But we have a Secretary of Defense that testified in Congress in May that the Afghan National Security Force will withstand the Taliban advance. We have chairmen of Joint Chiefs who are coming up as a member of that, who's supposed to advise on military policy. We have a Marine combatant commander. All of these people are supposed to advise, and I'm not saying we've got to be in Afghanistan forever, but I am saying, if any of you throw your rank on the table and say, hey, it's a bad idea to evacuate Bagram Airfield, strategic air bases, we evacuate it. Did anyone do that? And when you didn't think to do that, did anyone raise their hand and say, we completely messed this up? I've got battalion commander friends right now that are posting similar things, and they're saying, wondering that all the lives were lost and it was in vain, all those people that we lost over the last 20 years. And it goes on to say that we're all part of the chain, while every link may not be tested, the strength of the chain is large, strong as expected, good link, something like that. What I'll say is, from my position, potentially all those people did die in vain. We don't have senior leaders that own up, raise their hand and say, we did not do this well in the end. Without that, we just keep repeating the same mistakes. This amalgamation of the economic / corporate / political / higher military ranks are not holding up their end of the bargain. I want to say this very strongly. I have been fighting for 17 years. I am willing to throw it all away to say to my senior leaders, I demand accountability.
All right, pretty powerful stuff. So let's bring now Stuart on. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Stuart Scheller. Scheller served 17 years.
Sorry, I need to shut off this. Here we go. All right. So thanks so much, Stuart, for joining us. Thanks to you for taking the time, and thanks for what you've done for the nation. People. I know so many people that are 100% behind you, and you've seen it throughout the last crazy month. I don't know how painful that must have been. What you've been through has been pretty incredible. I do have before we get started a couple of things I wanted to share. Of course, we've seen your video, very powerful message. We've seen kind of your exemplary career. Like you said, you pretty much put it at tremendous risk, and kind of for people, threw it away to some degree. But now you have so many more opportunities, I guess. So who knows what's going to be next, right? But tell us a little bit about your journey, and kind of what pushed you, to record this video at the time.
Yeah. First of all, Nick, thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate the opportunity to engage with your guest. That was just one of those times where I went into that day not expecting to make a video, not expecting to make a statement, but it was a slow burn over time where I had experienced things in Iraq and Afghanistan through my education, where when you're younger, you see things that are wrong, but you just assume people that are older have more insight than you. And so you kind of push those questions to the back of your mind, but they stay there. And I continue just working through them. And I just developed a deeper understanding really when I got my master's in military science and I focused my thesis on foreign diplomacy, where I realized we haven't really won a war since World War II. I mean, stalemate in Korea, potentially you could argue Desert Shield, Desert Storm, but I mean, the decade-long wars of Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan did not achieve the political objectives set forth by the politicians. That's where wars are won, in that scene between politics and senior generals. And it doesn't matter how good the tactics are on the junior level, they can't overcome bad strategy. I mean, even the smaller operations, whether it's Beirut, Kosovo, Libya, Syria, Somalia, I mean, the list goes on and on. And so what's happening is these senior general officers are pointing to adjacent departments, whether it's the Department of State, the CIA, and they're absolving themselves of responsibility, or they're saying that the political objectives cannot be achieved. But the thing is, if you're a senior military officer and a politician gives you an objective, you either resign and say, I can't achieve that objective, let the next guy try and do it, or you assume responsibility, but you don't get to go back after the fact and say, well, those objectives weren't realistic. Well, then who's accountable for it? You are. You're the senior military professional. And so there was no better example than the Afghanistan evacuation. I mean, we conducted the evacuation during the peak fighting season. Anyone that's been there knows that November to March, the Taliban hibernates in the mountains of Pakistan. General McKenzie knew that. All the generals knew that. But the PR stunt of September 11th was worth risking American lives, American treasure. We evacuated Bagram Air Base. General McKenzie took 3 months to make that decision. He had planners from April to middle of June planning on using Bagram. And then indecisively, a month before they evacuated, he decided to pull it. And then we left 7,000 prisoners in the prison. Suicide bomber most likely came from there. The Taliban walked in, released them all. They walked up to Kabul. A day late and a dollar short, General McKenzie realized this thing was falling apart. He threw 5,000 troops at the problem. They were forced to rely on external security from the Taliban. Obviously, they let a suicide bomber through, kills 13 service members, kills hundreds more standing by the gate. And that's the moment where I made the video. But I mean, even right after that, then we conducted a drone strike. We killed nothing but 7 children and 3 women. And then the president, the Secretary of Defense, and General McKenzie got in front of everyone and talked about what an overwhelming success it was. General Donahue, after surrendering to the Taliban, takes a picture of himself as he's walking onto the helicopter as the last man, like he's some hero. Like, what person, after you get 13 people killed and completely fail, takes a picture and shares it all over social media like you're some hero? I mean, I was disgusted.
Yeah, no doubt. And, I've seen it also in my only 3 years in the department, obviously not as impactful as what you were able to do. But I've seen that complacency. We'll talk about the complacency. But, I've obviously, you knew doing this that you were effectively putting your career at risk, a tremendous risk. But also at some point, it became pretty clear that they were gunning for you, and your freedom was at stake. So what made you, and I know you kept pushing and continued to speak up for a very long time, even when you realized, hey, they're coming after my freedom. What made you keep going?
So when I made that first video, like, I went into that day not expecting to make a video. I made the first video, and you can even go back and look at my social media. Everyone was getting on my social media and demanding my resignation. And I told them very professionally, like, hey, I'm not going to resign. I want to continue to serve. I plan to let the investigation take place, and I'm just going to let the chips fall. Like, I expected to be fired, but I expected an investigation to take place. And quite honestly, in any leadership organization, doesn't even have to be the military. If you're a leader and one of your senior middle managers, which is essentially to what I am, comes out and makes a statement like that, you have to assume that much of the force feels the same way. So any leader, when there's problems like that, needs to address those problems. So what I expected was an investigation. I would be fired, publicly reprimanded, but then they would maybe even pull me into the Pentagon, where we would go around and talk about the problems that need to be addressed in the military for us to evolve. And they just didn't do that, right? So the reason I continue to speak out is because nobody addressed the content of my statements. And not only did they not address it, they didn't allow an investigation to take place. They fired me immediately. And then they all started trying to bully me. And so I just came to a point where I thought, I have a choice. I can back down and just take the punishment and submit, or I can just take this all the way and continue to illustrate the hypocrisy of this system. And I just decided to push all the chips in.
And you did, right? And you talked about the complacency, right? And we'll talk about the complacency because I've seen it also in the building on innovation stuff. You've seen the Joint Staff talk about China doing their 200 hypersonic launches compared to the 9 hypersonic launches we've done in the US as almost a Sputnik moment, right? And you argue, well, it's probably is more than just almost, right? And people just, I don't know for what reason, keep calling China, a near peer adversary where really they are kicking our asses when it comes to cyber and AI and machine learning and a lot of the top, most important innovation that are going to drive the world in, 10, 20 years from now. And so what do you see when it comes to the complacency you talked about of these people that not only are wrong and make the wrong assessments, the wrong decisions, but they also effectively get away with it?
Yeah, so I just wrote a book, and accountability has kind of been the banner that's been associated to me, but accountability doesn't address why they failed. Accountability just holds them accountable for that failure. It causes a course correction. But why the military consistently is failing is a deeper problem. It's cultural. And in my book, I outline it pretty well. The central problem is that in the military, there is no objective way to be promoted. So every service gets promoted based on a evaluation from their superior, at least the officers do. And so, if I'm a company commander and I have 5 subordinate platoon commanders, I'm going to rank you 1 through 5. And maybe in my assessment, 1 through 5 completely has to do with the objective performance that we determine is required for your job. Or maybe it has to do with me just liking you. Or maybe, you might be the best, but you're always disagreeing with me in public, so I make you number 3, right? And so these two phenomenons do not overlap when I talk about proficiency and performance and your evaluation. And so what's happened is over a long enough timeline, the system has drifted to where the singular focus is now pleasing your boss, because that's how you get promoted. And sometimes pleasing your boss involves being proficient and performing well, but a lot of times it has to do with all these other peripheral things. And that you can trace that all the way up to the senior ranks, where they're doing the same thing with political leaders. When everyone uses the term woke generals, they're really misdiagnosing the problem. We don't have woke generals. We have generals that want to please their bosses at the expense of doing the right thing, and that is apolitical. So the problem is we have a system that is built around pleasing your boss and not doing the hard, courageous thing. And so I have a lot of recommendations on how to fix that, but that's the number one problem.
Yeah, and you're spot on again, right? When it comes to that pleasing your boss mentality, right? I had not seen it as strongly as with this last administration, where politics now are really completely driving a lot of the decisions. You've seen it with critical race theory and many of the nonsense that we've seen being pushed in the department. And in the meantime, right? What's that?
Can I jump in there?
Yeah, go for it.
I have a great example. So I was a regimental OPSO, and I'm watching, this is in April, May. I'm watching, at that point, Russia had already staged all its troops on the Ukrainian border, even though the media really didn't start talking about it till October-ish. And we were conducting the largest drawdown of the longest war we've ever had, right? And we got all these cultural problems I'm talking about. We have problems with procurement. We have problems with education. We have problems with evaluation, promotion, retention. And Lloyd Austin, our Secretary of Defense, after 100 days comes out and says, I've done my problem framing. The biggest threat facing the DoD is COVID, followed by extremism. Like, that is the quintessential. He is echoing what is important to politicians, and he has no idea, or he does, and he just doesn't care on what the military needs. And that is just, it's a case study on why the military continues to fail.
Yeah, and by extremism, it didn't mean ISIS; it meant U.S. Extremism, which is almost even worse because we don't have a lot of evidence of that whatsoever. So it's a perfect example, right? When you see China effectively injecting their Marxist nonsense into schools and now reaping the benefits of this after the last 20 years, and you see kids now having that kind of mentality of anti-American, dividing, of course, a nation between Democrats and Republicans. In the meantime, China is moving fast forward. And when you talked about the fact that we haven't won a war since World War II, which is pretty spot on again. But when you take a look at the current capabilities we have when it comes to innovation, when it comes to the real capabilities that are going to let us win the fight of tomorrow, not just the fight of yesterday. We spent a lot of money on chips and jets and fancy, F-35. But when it comes to the rest of the innovation space, we don't do that well. In fact, we're pretty well behind commercial companies. You've seen, SpaceX effectively enabling us again to be able to use U.S. rockets to send people back to the ISS, where we used to use Russian rockets. How are we okay with that, right?
Yeah, so I outlined this. This is a great issue, again, that Secretary of Defense is not itemizing. That if you're in the service, obviously you see the problems with procurement and budget, which directly relates to technology because it takes so long to get items procured that the technology is already outdated. So as a regimental OPSO, I figured out how to develop a relationship with the Office of Naval Research. So in the Marine Corps, there's an Office of Naval Research, and why that's relevant is because they would get cutting edge technology that was under the banner of testing. And so it cut through all the red tape of the 20, 30-year acquisition process. And so I was able to get unmanned vehicles, counter UAS, all of this high-speed technology, right? And I had access to it because I figured out how to navigate this back door to get technology that we really should have standard, but we have senior leaders that just are incapable of changing what they even acknowledge it's a broken system. And as I'm planning this regimental-sized operation, my regimental commander came in and said, hey, Stu, pump the brakes on all this technology. And I tried explaining to him, like, sir, the battalion commanders don't know how to ask for this stuff. This is important that the Marines get exposed to it. And he basically shut me down, and I really contemplated on it. And his thought process was, we need to be good with the gear that we have. And there's some truth in that, right? Like, you need to get proficient with what you have. But the other part of it is possible that when you bring in new technology that senior officers don't understand, it leaves them behind in terms of their control of the battlefield. So I, as the regimental OPSO, was bringing all these capabilities that was changing the fight of the operation that we were planning. And I think it made him very uncomfortable. And so you also got to realize that this slow acquisition of technology makes these 40-year in service, 60-year-old men, they don't understand it. And the 22-year-old that's coming in might actually be able to navigate the battlefield better. And, all their talk about innovation, it's all bullshit unless they're willing to update the procurement process to get technology in the service, in the hands of the warfighter at a pace that it requires.
Yeah, and a lot of people are afraid of, but from innovation, right? You see it all over the place. Obviously, harder when you're older, no doubt. And I bet you can kill somebody with a pen, in 50 different ways. I probably cannot do that, but we probably can also give you better options and options that don't put people at risk. You talked about the 13 lives lost in that Afghanistan debacle. Obviously, there's also a good example of a lot of companies, including Google and others, always pushing back at partnering with the DoD and bringing best of breed innovation. You've seen it with the Project Maven, where Google decided to drop the engagement after a few hundred of employees started to complain. And we kind of managed to find out that a lot of the Google leadership behind this were actually born in China. So, it's something to keep in mind. And what you see also is effectively people saying, oh, you have blood on your hands. I remember doing a few conference on the Silicon Valley as a chief software officer of the Air Force and Space Force, and I would have people wait in line to shake my hand and then refuse to shake my hand and say, oh, you have baby blood on your hands, and what other nonsense. They live in kind of this bubble of the Silicon Valley. But we have another bubble too, right? We have the DoD bubble, and the DoD bubble is very much what you describe. There's this defense industrial base, all these companies looking to get all these juicy contracts, often under delivering at 10 times the cost and 10 times slower than the normal pace of industry. And yet you see them winning contracts after contracts, where you see the government spending, $750 billion a year of taxpayer money. I would argue we probably get 10 cents on a dollar of return on investment when it comes to the money we spent, both, wasting on acquisition nonsense, a lot of it on buying the wrong things, and probably, 10 cents wasted on just failing at buying stuff right, which is fine. But there's a massive bureaucracy and a massive bubble, which effectively guarantees all these people to play in the same club together and guarantee the cushy job, when you leave the department. And that's why a lot of people refuse to make the noise you and I are making, I guess, because they want to find the next cushy job, in the defense industrial base. So what are your thoughts when it comes to, having people be able to go back to the commercial side, the real commercial side, not the DIB, go work, for SpaceX or whatever company, and then come back and have kind of this more open two-way street of talent, so we can finally, have people understand what's happening on the commercial side. When I sent, some of the Pentagon leaders to SpaceX, I can tell you when they saw the velocity and what's going on at SpaceX, I think their brain imploded. They just couldn't take it. If I leave them for 2 weeks, I think they would be, in a coma or something. So what do you think is the right step to kind of solve this?
Yeah, so you brought up two issues really with that question. The first issue is senior military officers going to work on the board for the oligopoly of contracting firms that run really 95% of all government contracts. And I'll just use General Mattis because not a lot of people know. I mean, General Mattis is maybe one of the most famous generals. General Mattis went and worked for General Dynamics immediately after getting out, left to go become the Secretary of Defense. And then as soon as he resigned, he went back to General Dynamics. Lloyd Austin goes and works for Raytheon. I don't think we can stop once they get out them to go work for these boards, but we can sure as shit take away their retirement, like make the generals choose. You want a retirement? Well, the ethical thing is that you shouldn't be put on a board of a big contracting company like a puppet. Those contracting companies aren't putting you there because you're the best person. They're putting you there because you have the ability to communicate with your peers in the General Officer Corps to buy contracts. It's insider trading illegally done legally. I mean, it's crazy that we've allowed it to happen. And it happens because these senior military leaders don't want to change it because they're the ones getting the $1 million a year for 4 meetings. So that's problem number one. The other problem you asked about was really the cross-pollination. So in any other organization, you're going to bleed off talent. But what outside organizations can do is they can bring in talent from other places. The military does not have that ability. They literally grow a general from 0 to 40 years. And when all the talent bleeds out, because it's strictly time-based, a lot of these very talented people look at it and say, I have to be a captain for 6 years before I'm even eligible for major. And I'm better than all of these people right now. I know it, but I literally have to sit here and punch the card and please my boss for 6 years when I can go work on Wall Street and make, $1 million next year. It seems to be a pretty easy answer to a lot of very talented people. Typically, the people that stay in are the ones that have general fathers. And so it's like a family legacy thing. And so those are still talented guys, but then it becomes even more incestuous because the father is more risk adverse because of the namesake. The son is more risk adverse because of the namesake. And you just get this nepotism and you bleed off talent. And so your question was, how do you bring in external talent? I think the answer has been up to this point, contractors. And, they tried to do the time away and then come back, but it just really hasn't taken off. And quite honestly, I think rather than trying to solve that problem, you solve the problem by making it strictly performance-based. Try out for the next rank, pick whatever it is. If I'm an infantry officer, give me a warfighting scenario, give me 40 guys, give him 40 guys, let us go against each other, winner gets the next rank. And I can only be in the rank one day, but if I demonstrate that I'm better than you, like, why do I have to wait 6 years? And, that's kind of a revolutionary idea. But I honestly didn't even go further than that. Like, I don't think the college degree is what it used to be. I think all military members should go to the same boot camp. And then if you want to try out to be an officer, you don't need a college degree. If the college degree is as important as you think it is, then it should translate to you doing well in the performance for the officer tryout. And so, I've got a lot of radical ideas somewhat compared to the current establishment, but the truth is the establishment has failed. It's consistently failed, guys. So like these minor tweaks that we're making to a failing system are not working. Somebody needs to shock the system.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, right? When I look at every aspect of DoD right now, you look at acquisition, you look at hiring, retention, clearances, you look at what we buy, how we buy it, the process, the nightmare of a process with Congress, where you're supposed to know 5 years ahead what you're going to need to buy 5 years from now. I remember working on the 2029 funding cycle, which is, how do you even know in IT what's going to be relevant in 2029? I can tell you don't. And so you end up buying the wrong things and wasting more taxpayer money. So you're right. Pretty much everything needs to be disrupted from of course, term limit in Congress. I think everybody understands that that's a pretty common sense decision. In fact, if Congress was listening to Americans, they would have done it a long time ago. But of course, who knows who they actually represent, right? But what you look at, what's going on in the department. You've seen, of course, people failing. You've seen general officers not taking any sort of accountability whatsoever. Worse, the good ones often the ones leaving, right? The vice chairman, General Hayden, was the first one to really raise a lot of noise when it comes to China and the complacency of calling them, a near-peer adversary and letting them take leads on many of the innovation things we need to be focusing on. But at the same time, he was in a pretty significant senior role, and yet he was not able to move the needle, I would argue, whatsoever. So who do you think, what kind of role does someone needs to be in to be able to make a difference? Are you looking now maybe for what's next for you? Like, Congress, whether it's on the House or the Senate, and I would argue it's do they really have the tools to change what's going on? Is it more on the presidency side? Is it more on a political appointee like SecDef, DepSecDef? Who can actually solve this? And is it just one person, or do you think we need actually a bunch of people in different roles that kind of join work together to make this happen?
Yeah, I think the easy button is a Secretary of Defense that acknowledges everything we're talking about. I mean, just go back to General Mattis. I mean, General Mattis led 2 decades of failed war. Afghanistan, Task Force 58 in the opening gambit had the ability to envelop the Tora Bora region and kill Osama bin Laden. Failed to do so. That was more on Rumsfeld and his love affair with special forces. But then again, when we killed Osama bin Laden, General Mattis was the CENTCOM combatant commander. He had the ability to off-ramp or at least advise to do so. He didn't. He led the push in Iraq for the Marines. And, then when he resigned publicly over ISIS materialized over his failed counterinsurgency policies in Iraq. And so when he came into the Department of Defense, he was very much focused on China, and he did a lot of good things. Like, obviously, he's a very intelligent individual, and I have a lot of respect for him. But he didn't acknowledge the fundamental problems with the military. He didn't acknowledge all the failures we were having because he was so invested in a lot of them, and they were so close to him. We just haven't had a Secretary of Defense that isn't either a political puppet or has the ability to come in and really make change. So I would start there. If a more powerful approach would be what happened after Vietnam when they passed the Goldwater-Nichols Act. So the Goldwater-Nichols Act completely revamped how we fought wars. It created the joint environment. It created the combatant commands. And we've still not figured out how to create an interagency command. We don't have interagency doctrine right now. We continue to allow the Department of Defense to flick the booger on the Department of State. The Department of Defense, like you just said, gets $750 billion a year currently. The Department of State maybe gets 45. And so for the Department of Defense to say, no, the evacuation was a failure because the Department of State didn't have their act together, it's like, no, that is not good enough. Like, you have $750 billion. You were the main effort. Like, no. So if you could legislate it, you could create a new system that just inherently in the system would be more productive. But I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon. The last time they tried to do that was the Goldwater Nichols 2.0 that was led by John McCain, but that kind of died with John McCain. But when I wrote my master's paper, I researched a lot of the theories that were in there, and there was a couple good ones. General Jones was a former commandant, and he was also Obama's national security advisor. And he wrote a paper in The Atlantic in 2014 called All Sources of Power. And he lays out how you could make interagency regional centers if you were to legislate a new system. And I subscribe to that one more than all the others. So there are ideas out there. It's just people have kind of forgotten after the Goldwater Nichols 2.0 conversations of the need. And maybe in the fallout of Afghanistan, once Ukraine and Russia kind of dies down and we find ourselves just looking at each other, really trying to swallow the taste of failure, that this causes us to go back and relook at it. I think right now everyone's still kind of focused on Russia, Ukraine, and then you got the election cycle. So quite honestly, hopefully a lot of these changes can come in the March, April next year timeframe when we've got a new Congress, the wars have kind of calmed down. And you know what's going to happen is they're going to just start ringing the bell of China. And I got it. China is a threat. I got it. China is a peer. But at the same time, if all we do is focus on the next threat and we don't address our own internal problems, we're destined to continue to fail.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, let's take a question from the public. A lot of people were asking, what are your thoughts on what's going on in Ukraine? Since you mentioned it, I guess it's a perfect bridge.
I think the Afghanistan evacuation fallout obviously enabled it. I mean, you can just line the timing up. Putin lined all his troops up as soon as Biden made the decision to pull out of Afghanistan. Putin is opportunistic. I think Biden has a lot of ancestral ties in Ukraine, but at the end of the day, Biden didn't create Putin mobilizing the forces on the border, right? He doesn't have control of that. And so I think Putin wanted a quick victory. I think he was lulled into the quick victories he had in Georgia and Crimea, right? So that's what his plan is. I think his antiquated thinking of more land equals more power, like he wants the old USSR land grab. I don't think that's, it doesn't work like that anymore in my head anyway, at least in my analysis. And so the worst thing that could happen for Putin is he gets drawn out in a long land battle, continues to attrit his power, similar to what the United States has done the last 2 decades. Very easy to invade, much harder to hold, I can say from firsthand experience. And quite honestly, his whole, his projected justification was that NATO was encroaching. But now, even in what he's doing, he's turned people like Sweden and Finland saying they're going to join NATO. He might actually have the opposite effect of his initial intent, which is kind of funny to me. And so I think in the best case scenario is we just draw him into a long protracted war in Ukraine and just attrit him out. The scary thing would be is if Biden is stupid enough to get caught in a no-fly zone, which up to this point he hasn't. And so, I mean, that's good at least. And my biggest fear is if this goes into like Latvia or Romania or Poland, and then all of a sudden someone tries to trigger Article 5, even if they spilled into one of those other countries, if I was the president, I would take a long, deep breath and evaluate the situation. I wouldn't be quick to start war because I do think it'll quickly escalate nuclear. Now, at the end of the day, Putin has a hand in this, right? So if Putin is trying to invade all of Europe, like we have to go to war. I mean, so there's things that I don't want to run to war. Like a lot of people are ringing the bell. So I would just sit here and continue to evaluate and let him wear himself out would be my assessment.
And you've seen the SecDef actually visited Ukraine this week. So that's a pretty bold move, right? I mean, going there and going with the Secretary of State as well. What were your thoughts, looking at what they've been saying? First they said, hey, it would take only Russia a few days to take over Ukraine. Clearly, that's not what's happening. And they probably vastly underestimated, again, the power of the people. Overall, I guess the intelligence we're getting is pretty wrong. How do you explain that?
I don't think Russia tactically is nearly as good as people think they are. And they haven't fought since Afghanistan, which was in the 70s off the top of my head. I was watching a news clip. It was 40 armored vehicles, like bumper to bumper, moving down the road, and they showed it like a picture of power. Like, here comes this armored column. I mean, in modern warfare, like if you gave me a company of dismounted Marines and some javelins, I'd have that whole thing destroyed in a couple hours. I mean, I was blown away when I was looking at their tactics. And obviously that video meant somebody was flying over the top of them to take the video. And all those Russians are just sitting in their vehicles, like looking out their windows. So once I saw that, I thought, I mean, if this is how you guys are playing it, and the Russians they are capturing are saying, we didn't even know we were supposed to do this. Like, I think the top Russian military brass had a theory of a quick victory, probably had some information ops on their own troops. But once this thing got out here, their ability in terms of tactics, their ability in terms of understanding what the bigger picture is just not playing out well. And so the longer this draws out, that just the worse it's going to be for Russia. And quite honestly, the better it is for everybody else.
All right, so let's see what others are asking you today. So I have a couple more questions, but I want to give a chance to the public. Okay. What are your thoughts on what's happening with Twitter and Elon Musk?
I love it. I love every part of it. I'm so sick of people censoring free speech. And I've experienced it on my own social media platforms. They haven't completely shut me down, but I have definitive evidence that they're shadowing and doing things. Yeah. So it's like, I just don't understand why we can't have just free speech. And I think that the people are smart enough to weed through information. It doesn't require a big brother to tell me what information I should be subjected to, right? And so that's my take on it. Now, if it's like, if it's blatantly like racist or harmful to someone, like that's a different story. But if I have an opinion on COVID, or if I have an opinion on the war on Ukraine, you know what I mean? I should not be censored, in my opinion. And it happens almost everywhere. So I think social media and podcasts have taken off because the media has become so polarized and agenda driven that people just don't even know where to get information anymore. And so that's why podcasts have taken off. And that's why social media has kind of been a counterbalance to having free speech. And so that's why this free speech and social media is so important, because the news, it's very hard to get a straight shot without some type of agenda or opinion.
Yeah, I've got banned for a day on LinkedIn because I called people calling me a traitor idiots. So actually they can call me a traitor and that's okay, but calling them idiots is not okay. And of course that had nothing to do with the fact that I was on Fox News, that's for sure. So it's just, and what's interesting also is, I don't know if you had the same experience. I think maybe you've seen the same, but I remember when I came out and kind of made a little bit of noise, CNN and MSNBC and everybody reached out to me after Fox News reached out to me first. And, I tried to make it apolitical because I don't think it's a political subject. So I said, hey, I want to see everybody, right? And they said, well, if you go to Fox News, we're not going to have you. So we're going to organize a whole thing for you if you go, to CNN, MSNBC and all that. But if you go to Fox, then, we're going to cancel your appearance. I was like, holy cow, I'm not going to do this.
I can echo that, brother. So, I did the same thing. Like, what's more apolitical than holding senior military leaders accountable? The media is so tricky now. Like every article, if you go back and read about me, it says Lieutenant Colonel Scheller criticizing President Biden's debauched Afghanistan withdrawal. I never once mentioned President Biden's name. You saw that, you played the video. It was senior military and political leadership. But I just got drugged through the mud. And so then when I got out, because I was under a gag order and there's all these narratives that were run about me and I legally couldn't speak. So my goal in January and February was just to get on as many talk shows as I could. And I had the same view as you. I'm going to talk to anyone that will talk to me, as long as they don't like heavily edit, as long as you allow me a voice, you can drive the conversation with your questions, but give me the ability to counter. And CNN and MSNBC covered my story, and my PR agent reached out to them, and every one of them turned me down because I came out on Tucker Carlson was the first show, and they exactly what you just said. No, we can't have you on. And so the media, just in terms of who brings you on, almost projects to the public if you're Republican or Democrat. And it's almost, and so I've got people telling me like, why don't you go on any left-wing shows? And it's like, it's not from a matter of they literally won't bring me on. Like, what am I supposed to do? Not go on the right-wing shows so that I don't talk about anything?
Right. You don't talk to anybody. Come on. That's the better way. I had the same issue. I went to Tucker, my first interview, and I had exactly the same issue. So I can relate. And you've seen also, funny enough, CNN launching CNN Plus and spending $300 million on the launch and lasting a whole month before shutting down. So I guess maybe they're learning that if people don't want to watch the free stuff, they probably don't want to pay for it either, right? That's a pretty very complex business decision. Right? I don't know how these people make business decisions, but clearly maybe they should go get an MBA. I don't know if you know, but I only have a high school diploma. I created my company. I was 15, so I never needed to go to college. Like back to your point on schools and universities, I sold 12 companies, so I don't need to work anymore, which is always fun. But that's clearly demonstrate that you can do a lot of things just by being innovative and eager to make things happen. And honestly, for me, the U.S. is what empowered me to go as far as I was able to, being born in France, and being a French guy in the Pentagon. You can imagine, was not always easy, particularly when you're trying to disrupt a little bit the status quo when it comes to innovation. That was always a fun.
Yeah. So
All right.
actually, on that, Nick, to your point, I do so many different things right now. But one of the things I do is I'm partnered with a political action committee, and we are like ghostwriting legislation. And some of the legislation it should come out this spring is trying to get the GI Bill to also be used for starting a business, to your point. So like a 40-year-old that gets out of the military, instead of using his GI Bill on a $200,000 liberal school that the values may not be aligned, what's more American than starting a business? And honestly, I agree with you. You learn more in terms of action and being out there and doing it. Now, even if you just get a high school diploma and start businesses at 15, there's a lot of books you got to read in terms of self-education, which I'm sure you did. But I do think entrepreneurs really are the backbone of the United States. And so I'd love to see that get through the House and the Senate.
Yeah, no doubt. That's a great use of your political power that you have now. So what's, in fact, a lot of people were asking, so I'm going to ask anyway. I was going to ask anyways, but you've launched this website that you promoted over the last few months, called the AuthenticAmericans.com. But obviously, what's next for you? Are you gonna? Everybody wants you to run for office, so you're not gonna disappoint them by not doing that. I hope. I don't know what's gonna happen.
Yeah, I was approached to run for Congress in North Carolina in 22, and my life was too upside down. And
yeah, that was a lot for that year, right? That's the timing wasn't great.
I just physically, mentally, I needed to take a knee, and I'm glad I did. I've needed it. But I wrote a book. So the book comes out September 9th. I will spend probably all of August, September, October promoting the book. And then in November is the 22 election cycle. So then all those teams, those political teams, become available probably after the Christmas season in January. So really my decision point for me is January 23. But I'm thinking very seriously about it. I mean, I'm very involved in this 22 cycle. North Carolina, Ohio are kind of the states that I'm looking at. I'm from Ohio. I've lived in North Carolina for a while. And there's a bunch of availabilities in 24. So we'll see.
24 is the year. So you're going to have no choice. We're going to need you in 24. So, and I'm excited to read the book. So people were also asking, a lot of people, and I'm just going to take one example here, but pretty much everybody's kind of asking the same question. What can people do to help you and kind of support your Queen's Gambit chess maneuver that you've done here?
I love that. Yeah. So in the book, I actually kind of spell out the logic of that. And there was some thought behind that symbolism. I play a lot of chess. So you can find me on chess.com. It's Stuart Scheller.
I play too. We need to play one day.
So I played. It helps me when I get bored, engage my mind. So I play it on my phone. But queen out for me is because I usually bring my bishop and take a knight out. I like to disrupt the enemy's early formation. And so that's what I was showing on the board is the military hasn't seen something like this. I'm going to aggressively disrupt their opening moves. And then there's more chances for mistakes when you disrupt the enemy's opening position. And so that was the symbolism there.
So what can people do, I guess, to help you now with since you're not going to run and they can't vote for you just yet? They will be able at some point.
I'm not in need of anything. The way you can support me is through my website. So there's merchandise, there's donations through the political action committee, through just for me. But then there's the pre-order of the book. Quite honestly, if you want to support me, I'd say buy the book because I'm really proud of it and it's got a lot of good information. And so that's what I would recommend. And then if you want to go above and beyond that, there's a bunch of stuff on my website. My website is kind of my brand, my one-stop shop for all things.
Yeah. And how much time did it actually take you to write that book? Like, is it a lot of work?
It came quick only because I had really thought about, I spent some time in jail thinking about, it's funny. I hired a ghostwriter thinking that was the way to do it. And when you hire a ghostwriter, you got to do all these audios and record them.
Yeah.
And so I had spent 15 hours like going through each chapter, and then the guy started writing it and it was garbage.
You know, like
it was
I had the same issue.
So then I went back and rewrote it all. But you got to understand, like I had talked through everything. I had experienced
so you had the
a lot of things that I had already written in post. And so once I started cranking it, it came in like 2 months.
Yeah. That's a lot of work. People, always think it's particularly for people like you and me that that's not what we do, right? So
yeah.
So tell us a little bit about. A lot of people ask also. You mentioned that what happened when you were forced to, I guess, go to jail. I guess that must be a pretty insane experience for someone that got medals and served the nation. And how do you feel about kind of your own country putting you in jail for something like this?
How do I feel about how they did? I mean, they did it illegally. I mean, there's just no arguing that. I have the document. They wrote on the document for the pretrial confinement that I was a flight risk. Like I showed up at 08 that Monday. I mean, I had been in work every day. Like that is factually wrong, and they know that.
Flight risk,
so,
yeah.
So it's like they did it illegally. And
you had billions in the bank to go travel, and take a jet and fly to France,
It's tough as well. They're also, you're not supposed to go to pretrial for a special, only for a general. So like really like through and through, and the judge even said, he's like, I've never seen anyone put in pretrial for stuff like this, for like freedom of speech issues, essentially.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, at jail, it was all Marines. It wasn't like the movies where you think you're going to get shanked. I mean, the prison guards were all young Marines. The prisoners were all young Marines. They all knew me. They were all cool. It was just basically 9 boring days.
Did you feel people had a tough time publicly supporting you where they were inside of the government because of the fear of retaliation, supporting you publicly?
I mean, the military not only came out like shortly after, not only all services came out and said, do not like or share Stuart Scheller's content, but then all services directed small group discussions to talk about why what I did was wrong. So just think about the power of that narrative. I mean, so I'm just a guy trying to address problems, and the entire system is pressing pause on a Thursday to talk about how wrong I am. Like that's hard to fight.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, you're fighting a machine, right? That's probably why it's so difficult. And, particularly when you have both political interest, but also, corporate interest as well, right? Because all these companies made quite a bit of money by supporting what happened in Afghanistan, right?
Right.
So criticizing how we left and all the equipment we left on site and leaving before everybody was out, which is pretty common sense. I mean, even for me coming from software, I would say, I don't need to think too much to realize I probably want to wait before leaving to make sure everybody's out first.
A child, Nick. I mean, it's like, and what's crazy to me is all these military professionals, after I made my comments, are like, let's wait 20 years. And let's go back and look and see. Like, wait 20 years. Like, he's a general now. Like, we can all see that this is messed up, right? I'm like looking around. And I'm like, they're calling me crazy. They're calling me suicidal. I'm like, maybe I am crazy because this seems painfully obvious. And if none of you see it, then I guess I am crazy. If you all see something differently.
Yeah, it's pretty common sense, and that kind of puts us back to that complacency and a lot of people were asking when you went public and you did what you did, if you had any regrets now. What is it, 6 months, a little bit less, I don't know. What would you do differently, I guess?
Yeah, I think I did a podcast yesterday, and I just came up with this yesterday, so I guess this will be my new analogy. When you imagine if you're a UFC fighter and you go into a cage and you get into a fight, and whether you win or lose, like you're going to go back and watch the video and there's a million things you would have done differently. But if somebody asked you, would you have gone in the cage again? The answer is like, absolutely yes. You wish you would have done some things differently. And that's kind of how my take on it. If I could go back and tweak this word or that word, absolutely. But I was in a fight for my life. I felt like I was in a fight for like the soul of the nation. And I don't want to be overly dramatic, but like I felt very strongly about this stuff. So was there times where I would have said different things? 100%. Is there ways I could have done it differently? 100%. But looking back, do I regret it? No. Like, I think what I said was the right thing. No one else said it. So, all the arguments of it wasn't his place to say it. And it's like, well, who else said it? And it was like, well, I wish you would have gone through the processes. Well, the processes wouldn't have worked. And in my book, I illustrate how I went through some of them, and I was just shut down. And it's just like, everyone has these excuses of why I should have done it differently. But at the same time, they don't address, well, he was right. He was never charged with a false official statement. And, what was he supposed to do to actually affect change? And so then it comes down to the final argument of like, well, you're just not going to make any change. This is the way it is. And that's just such a defeatist mentality. And I just fundamentally and philosophically disagree. Like, the system is what we allow it to be. And we need people with courage that when the system doesn't work, have the ability to say like, hey guys, that was a failure. Can we agree that was a failure? Because if we can't, then we're just going to keep doing that.
Yeah, I don't think anyone even apologized or really even disclosed publicly that it was a failure, which is pretty common sense.
No. Isn't that crazy? In fact, they went the other way. They said what an overwhelming success the evacuation was.
Yeah, because I guess they thought maybe we could have lost more people, and maybe we could have spent more money and take more time. And I mean, you can always do worse, but that one would be tough to beat. I think it's pretty as bad as it can be, right?
It's like a third world nation did it. I mean, it's like, is this the United States military? Like the Philippines could have pulled this off better. Like, I promise you, they could have. Like, what? This is us, guys.
These camels, right? With this kind of, thank God it wasn't a more powerful country, I guess. But so you have kids, obviously. So what keeps you up at night? I know, after my 3 years in the Pentagon, I had no kids when I started. I know I have 3 kids under 3.5. I have twins and stuff. So I lost a lot of sleep spending that much time in the Pentagon, seeing pretty much how poorly we're doing in innovation and modern cyber warfare and all that kind of stuff. What keeps you up at night?
Yeah, I put it in the book. I address exactly this. I did not join the military to be a career military officer or to get a retirement. I joined the military so that I could leave America a better place for my 3 sons. That's what keeps me up at night. So everything I did was because of that. I mean, again, our key systems in our representative democracy are what we allow it to be. The power comes from the people. In the founding document, the Declaration of Independence, it states that very clearly. So the people have been lulled into a false sense that the centralized powers know what best. And I challenge that. I mean, the centralized systems are controlled by people. People are inherently good and evil. People need to be checked by higher systems because of that. But the higher systems have to be checked by the people because they drift off course too. And to check the higher systems requires people finding their voice. And I feel like a lot of people have just been lulled into, well, I've got a title, I've got a job, I've got a family, and these things are more important. And so I don't want to risk all that. Well, if everyone thinks like that, then the systems won't change.
And I guess we talked about Russia, right? And they're not as powerful as most people thought. And I agree, right? What are your thoughts on China, though? Looking at how sneaky and kind of small in terms of innovating in cyber and, machine learning and all the next generation capabilities, hypersonics, quantum compute, they're kind of leading, honestly, when it comes to those markets. Are they scaring you? They clearly injected all this nonsense in U.S. schools and making the kids be okay with participation trophies and right all that nonsense that we see nowadays, which obviously make us a weaker nation. So, do they scare you, China?
Yeah, China's obviously the biggest threat. I don't think Russia is really even. It's usually China and Russia thrown in the same argument, and I don't think Russia. The reason Russia is so scary is because they're led by Putin and they got a bunch of nuclear weapons.
Right.
But China is absolutely someone that if we went to war with, it would be a toe-to-toe fight. Like I'm not a defeatist. I do think we could beat them, but it would not be easy, and it would take us mobilizing the entire country, similar to what we did in World War II, which the American people in multiple generations haven't experienced. So it would be a completely different type of war. And it's one of those things where I agree with you. The open markets and the need to extend and have one global system has allowed China to close the gap much quicker than people realize. They've copied a lot of our technology, and in a lot of ways surpassed us and planted a lot of negative seeds in terms of all the things you just outlined. So 100%, they are the leading threat. They are an equal, but I do believe the American military, at least, has got more experience in it than any other military. China's got the manpower, but China doesn't have the geographic advantages that the United States has. The United States has got two big oceans on its coast, and it's got Canada and China, right? Mexico is a problem. I went down to the border personally because I don't trust the media, and I talked to a border control agent. And in his little 30-mile stretch of the 1,900 miles, he had 120 people crossing that one night. And when I asked him where they were from, he told me 10 of them were from China. And so
it's not just Latin America. It's also terrorists, and it's pretty scary.
So China has figured out how to bargain with the cartel, and they're actually pushing people to the cartel. And I don't know, like, if they're human trafficked or if they're like actual business. I don't know, who knows, but it's a problem. Right? So our stability in terms of borders really is Mexico. And again, we're so polarized, and the media is so like, it's misdirections. No one knows what to believe. And so I asked him, I was like, hey man, I want to make a post about this. Like, this is factual information. He was like, yeah. I was like, all right, I'm gonna post about it. And he's like, well, you can't include me or the stats. I was like, what do you mean? Like, these are facts. Like, why can't I do that? And he's like, I'll be fired. And so, like, that's where we're at. Like, this border control agent didn't want to speak the facts of the situation because he knew he would be fired. And so it's scary times, man.
Yeah, I was at DHS. I can tell you also the cyber defense side of critical infrastructure, power, water is a debacle. I don't know if you've seen, but 2 days ago, again, a hacker got into the California water plant and managed to, hack into the system using a username and password from a remote, connectivity and be able to infiltrate the water plant and potentially start changing the water filtration system levels so it would potentially poison people. He got caught by miracle because someone was watching the screen and saw the mouse move on the screen, which is, it's just like, and that, when you see China and the power, you talk about, China copying us, of course, they are also stealing a lot of the IP created, through billions of taxpayer investments, which also, help them streamline kind of that innovation. They're not very good at copying, thank God. They make a lot of mistakes, but at the same time, look at everything we buy, right? You look at all the devices we have at home, everything is made in China. You've seen also in medicine, we let China now effectively control most of the medicine production, where effectively, if we were at war against China, we can't have even penicillin. It's pretty scary times. I don't know how, Congress is okay letting that happen. You've seen also the power of social media. We talked about Twitter, but there's another one we didn't talk about today. I'd love to get your feedback. I know some people ask for that too. The TikTok platform, right, which I call the Chinese weapon of misinformation. If you look at TikTok in China, it's promoting videos on innovation and research and for kids, right, to go and innovate in engineering and different things. And here it's pushing, dance videos, right? It's no accident, right? It's on design to make us dumber, right? And then they get views, and that's what they're going to be targeting, and they're going to try to mimic what they see, right? What are your thoughts on all these kind of the power nowadays? We talk about the freedom of speech, and of course there are private companies, and people say, well, First Amendment doesn't apply to private companies. They do whatever they want, and then they cry when Elon Musk buys the company. But what are your thoughts when it comes to the fact that whether we agree or not, you can't compete and be relevant in 2022 if you're banned of the social networks? In fact, if you look at Trump running for president, I would argue, how could he win an election if he has no access to social media? I think it would be pretty difficult to get access to people. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, there's all kinds of conversations about technology infiltrating and its impact. So you brought up TikTok. In 2019, I was at Command and Staff College, and we talked about TikTok a lot. And another conversation back then was 5G. 5G was apparently the biggest threat because it was Chinese controlled. We couldn't get into it, and so on and so forth. And that conversation just kind of died. 5G came. All the big tech companies were like, no, we're making more money off of it. We can put more users between point A and point B. We don't care that it's a national security threat. And now we've literally stopped talking about it. And so I guess my take on all of these, there's always going to be another 5G. There's always going to be another TikTok where the private companies are going to just say no to the government. And so my opinion is the government just needs to find out alternate solutions so that when the Chinese does flip the switch, I mean, I don't think there's a way to stop it in the open system of technology today. So you got to figure out ways to provide alternate solutions. Just like you talked about penicillin, like as long as we have a alternate solution to penicillin when China flips the switch, then all right. But, I don't think you can stop TikTok. I don't think you can stop 5G. You just need to figure out ways to circumvent it when they do flip the switch.
Yeah, but at the same time, you see how China is smarter than us, right? If you look at how they ban American companies from accessing their market, right? They're literally saying, "Hey, no Google, no Facebook," right? And yet, we don't do the same. So how? I know we are an open nation. I know, we have different beliefs than the communist China, which is what makes us great. But at the same time, right? How do you compete if those guys can ban the U.S. companies? And we have a 20 to 25% tax when we import cars in China, and then they have a 2.5% tax when they bring Chinese cars in the US. How is that fair for manufacturers, for example, right?
Yeah, the bottom line is it's not. And so in American foreign diplomacy, an easy model for national power is DIME: diplomacy, information, military, and economic. And so you wage war when a politician tries to use diplomacy, information, and economic to get somebody to do something and they don't, then you use the military branch. And you can see it in Ukraine right now, right? The sanctions, those are diplomatic, economic, information sanctions. The only other source of power we have is military. And you can have more complex acronyms. That's the easiest one. But the reason I bring that up is to say China has C in there for corporations. So they have DIME C, in my opinion. The United States doesn't, right? It's the economic ways. I mean, there's some incestuous ties, got it. But ultimately, the United States can't tell Apple, can't tell Google, can't tell these big companies what to do, can't tell Ford, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas China literally puts state-run people in these corporations and then sends these corporations to the Horn of Africa, to Europe, to the United States, and they send back information, they send back technology, they send back all of these things from the state. And so is that more efficient in terms of lobbying national power? Sure, it is actually. But is it as resilient of a system because you have one person that's kind of driving the initiative, and if they go off course, the whole house of cards kinds of fall. It's not as resilient. So we have chosen a system that's more resilient, that has more tentacles and more ways to innovate in a lot of ways, but it's not as efficient, and that's just the product of our system.
So what happens, I guess, when you see, all these companies around social media kind of really partnering, right? You've seen it when they decide that we couldn't talk about where the COVID-19 virus came from, banning people from saying it came from a lab where, as part of the government, I can tell you the evidence I've seen makes it very, very, very likely that the virus came from a lab. And yet, people decided it was not something we could talk about. And you can see, these companies work together to make sure we don't have the chance to talk about it. You've seen it in the media, you've seen it in Hollywood, right? Movies pushing kind of the Chinese agenda, right? And suddenly you see Hollywood stars, apologizing in Chinese to the Chinese and all that kind of nonsense. How do we have a chance at still winning if on principle you're right when you say, hey, we have this open universe, but now we realize, well, maybe it's not as open. It's also maybe controlled by this smaller group of people that get to decide for the rest of us. So it's not one person like China, but it's suddenly maybe a small group of people.
Yeah, I think in terms of everything COVID, I think that's what President Trump's strength is, actually. When there's a popular narrative, he's not afraid to push back on it. I mean, he was calling it the Wuhan virus, the Chinese virus. He was talking about how it was created in a lab, and everyone got all upset at him. But why? And he even pulled out the United States out of the World Health Organization, which I thought was bold because they weren't going in and investigating when they should have. And so in a lot of ways, that was President Trump's strength, right? Like these narratives that just don't make sense. A lot of times we allow the media or other special interest groups to kind of silence us in a lot of ways. And I still am not sure where the virus came from. Like, how have we not actually narrowed that down? Like, where's the report? I guess that I'm answering your question on the virus thing, but in terms of, the efficiency of, the closed system versus open system, I always would prefer to remain open, at the expense of tightening up in terms of a dictatorship. Same thing with like freedoms. I would prefer to assume risk of COVID and maintain my individual freedoms and have my freedoms encroached in terms of a centralized power. So in all respects, I prefer decentralization, individual freedoms, and I try to stay consistent with that, even when it's unpopular. And so that's just, I prefer smaller government. But I don't believe, the old argument of, let's get back to the state governments. Like, that's just not going to happen anymore. Like, our systems are too big. We're too interconnected. We have to have a lot of these large government systems. That being said, I prefer to have as much of a healthy balance with individual freedom and openness as I can.
Yeah, and at least we're consistent, and you're consistent in your beliefs because actually you believe in them. Unlike some others that say, hey, voter ID is racist, but then hey, you need to get a vaccine and have your voter ID, your ID with you to prove you got a vaccine, which is not racist to go eat at a restaurant. That's fine, that's not a problem. But to go vote, that's a big deal, right? And to fly and to go get an apartment and whatever else you do every day. It's just interesting how people, kind of tweak their beliefs according to the wind and maybe according to some of the political agendas they have, right? And people like you, I guess, have the backbone to stay and stick to what they believe because you actually believe it. So it's always exciting to see. All right, so you talked about the complacency. A lot of people, and I'm trying to kind of, obviously we got 700 questions for you, so I'm trying to summarize it into a smaller footprint and also group them by themes. And we did cover a lot of them, but people kind of brought up a lot, kind of your approach to the complacency of the leadership. We talked a little bit about that, of course, when it comes to people at least recognizing we messed up. When you see today, the Joint Staff and the chairman of the Joint Staff talking about China and talking about even what's going on in Ukraine, a lot of people were kind of complaining about the fact that we still call China a near-peer adversary. What are your thoughts on the near-peer aspect of this? I mean, for me, it's kind of completely ridiculous that China is also getting passes when it comes to the Paris Accord, where they get 10 years on us to stop making any kind of changes on their climate change actions because they are allegedly a third world country growing. Meanwhile, we gave them pretty much all of the wealth we have by moving all the innovation and a lot of the manufacturing in China. So what are your thoughts when it comes to people still calling China a near-peer adversary?
Well, at the end of the day, I wouldn't want to live in China. I mean, yeah, a lot of those things are going over there, but those people are making 5 cents an hour to make shoes. It's like LeBron James, right? Like, he's very anti-slavery, and he endorses Nike, and Nike literally uses slave labor to make all of his clothes. And so we're talking about like the hypocrisy of it. Like, come on, bro, like, you be smarter. Yeah.
Are they a near-peer adversary, or are they a peer? When you compare with Russia, would you put China ahead of Russia?
China is a peer.
Okay. So people continuing to say, hey, it's almost a Sputnik. I remember the Joint Staff chairman say, hey, the 200 hypersonic launches, that's almost a Sputnik moment. In my opinion, hypersonic are a massive threat to the nation, and of course the investment that China is doing in AI and machine learning, and they just launched the Shanghai Data Exchange, where companies are stupid enough to go sell their data on the exchange, and of course the CCP gets a free copy of all the data flowing through the Chinese exchange of data, which is kind of a stock market for data, right, where people can get access to massive volume of data, which then empowers their machine learning to do better and innovate faster. Of course, they already have access to 1.4 billion people and their data, stealing that, of course, from the source. So I was a little baffled to hear again and again the chairman of the Joint Staff say, that's almost a Sputnik moment, almost like to minimize how bad things are. And I would argue, many companies refuse to work with the U.S. government because they're like, oh, you're killing babies and all the nonsense because of the media nonsense. But if they knew how bad the situation is with China stealing so much IP and hacking into dozens of organizations all over the world on a daily basis, in the U.S. particularly, maybe Americans will wake up and proactively want to come and make a difference and give us access to the best of breed we have on the commercial side, so the government can finally get access to the best of breed. But by calling them near peer adversary, overclassifying all these things, we can't talk about most of that stuff. So Americans just don't know about it, feel complacent because we're spending 750 billion of taxpayer money a year in defense, although it's not often spent wisely. And many programs end up failing and wasting a ton of money multiple times sometimes, as you know. So how do you feel about kind of that leadership on the Joint Staff side as well?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think China is a peer. I think General Milley is he's not very good. I mean, first, let's just start. He's clearly 100 pounds overweight, right? I don't know at what point as a general officer you're not beholden to the same weight standards as the rest of us. Two, he's well overreached in his terms. Like, his job is to be a military advisor, to train, man, and equip the combatant commanders. And he's up there talking about global warming and critical race theory, just like all these things that don't make sense to me. And, and then the whole thing about usurping President Trump's authority with the weapon codes. And it's just like this long list of, he's not the guy, and he's lost his way a little bit. And I don't know who keeps him there. I'm sure it's the president. He serves at the pleasure of the president, but I'd like to see him go. He's not been good.
Yeah. I guess you met a lot of, and you've seen a lot of generals over the years, but who would be on the other side, someone that you're looking at and say, hey, that guy is probably would be a great leader for tomorrow?
It's hard because we haven't won many wars.
Yeah.
So I'll go back to Korea, where we still had some World War II veterans that won some stuff. So MacArthur in Korea, when we were caught at the Pusan perimeter, single-handedly convinced the entire Navy and the entire force to land at Incheon, achieved operational success, and then he pushed north, and he actually wanted to use tactical nukes against the Chinese. And President Truman, another war veteran, told him, no, you can't do that. And that's kind of like how the system worked well, even though the campaign was kind of a stalemate. But I guess in modern day, there's a lot of very talented 1 and 2 stars. My problem is 3-star level, it starts becoming congressional appointment, and that's where it literally becomes very political. And so if I was a Secretary of Defense, I would start grabbing some outside the box thinkers that are colonels, maybe 1 stars, and I would just start making them 4 stars immediately. Then we did something similar to that in World War II. We cleaned house of all these old generals, and that's how Eisenhower got to the position that he was, because we did a cleaning. Somebody was smart enough to clean house, and we just haven't done that in a long time.
Do you feel like the people staying the longest? We've seen a lot of great people leaving the department, and of course, usually that's the good ones. The bad apples, unfortunately, seem to stay put longer. Do you feel like that's kind of what's happening? Also, like the best talent ends up being frustrated and leaving. Do you hear a lot of people leaving the department?
Yeah, we kind of talked about this earlier. I think a lot of them, based on the time-based system, end up getting out. I think the ones that stay in are typically the generals' fathers, and there's unfortunately a large preponderance of them. And there's very few very talented from the beginning, non-incestuous relationship within the military previously that end up at the top.
Yeah. It's kind of scares me, a lot of the top talent we had on the DoD side on the software side, innovation side, cloud, cyber. I've seen a lot of people leave, including people leaving before the retirement times, and that's walking away sometimes from significant amount of money. But seeing how much money they can make on the outside is kind of a no-brainer sometimes, and maybe they come back as a reservist or something. But that's a big concern I have. Seeing the number of people leaving, particularly I think, of course, after the debacle in Afghanistan, I think people have a tough time. We're not getting a lot of data from the recruitment centers and how bad it is to attract new enlisted. I would be not surprised if it's pretty difficult right now to get people excited about coming to serve.
Yeah, agreed.
So we got so many questions, but we don't want to abuse of your time. What do you want to share with the group as a kind of a last message that you would want to share to everybody here listening?
Yeah, I'll just say Authentic Americans is my brand. Check it out, AuthenticAmericans.com. I'd ask that. I think the book is really good. I really do. And I think it'll be widely shared. It'll be in all the stores, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, Walmart. Also, obviously, most of the sales will be on Amazon. You can pre-order it on my website. And all my social medias are tied to my website. And if you do have a question that wasn't asked or answered, you can find me on any of the social medias through the messenger, or you could just shoot me an email. My email's on the website too, and I'll get back to you. I've gotten back to really almost everyone. I try my best. So please stay engaged, and appreciate you bringing me on, Nick.
Yeah, and we got the website on the screen here. Are you going to do a lot of people were asking if the book will be also on audiobooks?
It will be. I asked if I could audio it myself. My publisher was like, I don't know. So whether it will be my voice will be up.
You don't have my French accent, okay? You could do much better than me, so I think you should. Don't listen to him. A lot of people do it. I think you have a perfect, tone, not to make people fall asleep. So
thanks.
I would do it. I think you have a great, character, and I think people resonate with you, and it would be stupid not to do it. Don't listen. That's a perfect example of not listening to the traditional nonsense. I think that's a good example.
I'm going to send them this interview. I'm not going to come splice this up.
Just tell them I said to do
it.
Yeah. So, well, we were very lucky to have you as always. I'm gonna show people, of course, your website here, and we talked about it, but just for people to check the URL here. Also wanted to remind everybody, if you like this kind of content, to subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Nicolas Chillon. The next episode on Tuesday will be with Zach Butler from T-Trait. He's also one of the founders of Istio, the Service Mesh. So we're going to go back into the boring tech. I'm sorry, Stuart, it's not as fun as having you on the show. It's, I'm a tech guy. I'm a geek, right? So we have to talk about tech too, right? Otherwise, I don't know what to talk about all day. So we're gonna have Zach talk about next generation access control, zero trust, how to implement it at scale across the government. He's helped NIST write multiple special publications, including the special publication on Service Mesh. If you have not read it, you should. It's pretty good. So we're going to have Zach next week at 1 p.m. Eastern. And wanted to thank again Stuart for joining us. And please keep the fight. Keep making sure our kids have a fighting chance at winning against China in 20 years. Stay healthy. Stay safe. We'll see you next week. Thanks.